Grab a seat. Welcome. I'm glad you guys are all here. I don't know if you could read this, but no class next week. Okay? No class next week.
I have to class over.
So, all right.
You know that she didn't try to repeat that.
And today's little thing is no God, no peace. No God, no peace. All right. So last week we got off track a little bit just to, I hope you guys enjoyed that little message from God. Pretty powerful. And so we're back in the book today, and we're in We Agnostics, and this whole chapter is got a bunch. Almost every page has instructions for us. Okay, so I just want to go over again what we talked about. That believing is about hope is about believing. It's not about faith. Okay, faith comes with experience later on. Next step, hope. So you can't have faith in something you don't believe in. You have to first come to believe, okay? So what we're going to do, hopefully, is we're going to learn how to get in touch with a higher power, and then become comfortable with this higher power. And the reason that we need to be comfortable with this higher power is there's no possible way you could take a third step if you are not comfortable with your higher power. Let's think about that for a minute. Right? Asking us to turn our will and our lives over to the care of this higher power, right? In the next step. But if you're not comfortable with this higher power, there's no way you can do that. So the idea here in step 2 is to get in touch with the God, get comfortable with this God, so you can take a third step. All right. So I think on page 44, I think we did the first paragraph, if I'm not mistaken. But down on the second paragraph says, so one who feels he's an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible, but to continue as it is means disaster, especially if he is an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. And you would think, why is that? Why is that so? Why is living on a spiritual basis not an easy thing to face? But well, the reason for that is because we're so stuck on, we want to do what we want to do. We want to act the way we want to act, and we're so into that kind of a mode that this alternative of spiritual basis is not very appealing. And then he says, but it isn't so difficult. About half our original fellowship were of exactly that type. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics. But after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of life or else. So that's a pretty harsh statement there, right? Now, at the bottom of the page, it says, if a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, and make note, he says alcoholism, not alcohol, okay, was sufficient to overcome alcoholism, again, not the drinking, but the alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral, we could wish to be philosophically confident. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. So remember when we started this about 2 weeks ago, and we broke down the definition, the root origin of the word agnostic, and it means lack of knowledge, right? So I'm sure you've heard during your life that knowledge is power, right? So if I lack knowledge, then I lack the power. And in this case, it's the power to, kind of relationship with God. So he says, lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. But where and how were we to find this power? So right there, the search for God begins. Right there. This is step 2, right here, is the search for God begins right there. Where and how are we to find this power? And look what he says. Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. So the main reason of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is not to stop drinking. When people think about that all the time, they think we're here to stop drinking. No, if you want to drink, go right ahead. The main reason for this book is to put you in touch with a power that's going to solve your problem. Says that means we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual as well as moral. And it means, of course, that we're going to talk about God. So I wonder how many people work with their sponsees or how many people have worked with their sponsors have sat down and talked about God. And we discussed that in here already, right? Because you don't know if the person's God is a light bulb, right? So you have to talk about God. The book says we're going to talk about God. So when we talk about lack of power, I just want to mention this. We're not just talking about drinking or using. We're talking about in all areas and all aspects. So whatever you're working the steps on, the reason you're working the steps on probably is because you lack the power when it comes to that. Okay, and like it could be for anything. I always wanted to be a great husband, a great dad, a great, but I just wasn't around. Did I have the power to be? Not the way I was living. Today I do, yes. I was less than a husband, I was less than a father. So what this step is asking us is to believe that we have a chance at staying sober, provided we're willing to enlist the help of a higher power or a power other than ourselves. Whatever that power is, the second step encourages us to believe that this power can restore us and free us to make healthy choices for ourselves. And that's why we have to work the steps on all other issues. Yes, we're working on alcohol and drugs when we first get here, but I mean, what are you going to do? 10 years sober, why would you work the steps on alcohol and drugs? Doesn't make sense. Especially when there's a whole bag of tricks that you probably need some help with, right? I was laughing because I heard somebody say, share a long time ago, he said Christopher Columbus was an alcoholic. Christopher Columbus. And I fell right into his thing. Why did you say Christopher Columbus was an alcoholic? Well, the guy left where he was. He didn't know where he was going. When he got to where he went, he didn't know where he was. And when he got back to where he started from, he didn't know where he'd been. And the whole trip was financed by a woman. So if that's not alcoholic behavior, I don't know what is. All right. So let's go over to page 46 for a minute. Let, let's talk about the word sanity for a minute. I think we've already touched on this, but sanity for us, a good definition for the word sanity for us is the ability to see the truth about ourselves. Sanity is the ability to see the truth about ourselves. Insanity is the inability to see the truth about ourselves. Because the truth is going to be what sets you free. And the truth sets us free from what? From the lie. The lie is insane. So sanity is the ability to see the truth, and our truth is not the whole truth. That's the problem. Only God can see the whole truth. So our perception of the truth leads us right back into the lie, into the insanity. So the truth has to come from someone or somewhere beyond us. That's why we need to incorporate a God. Does that make sense to you? All right. The bottom of the big paragraph on the top of page 46, at the end of it, in the middle, it says, how could a supreme being have anything to do with it all? And who could comprehend a supreme being anyhow? Yet in other moments, we found ourselves thinking, when enchanted by a starlit night, who then made all this? Now, these are not just words. Like I said, this is not a novel. We don't want to read this. This is a textbook. We want to study this. So here's a question. When you see a question in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, you need to stop and think about what the answer is instead of keep reading. This is how you study a textbook. So here's a question. Who then made all this? Enchanted by a starlit night. Who made this? Did it happen from a big bang? The Big Bang is probably the most intellectual bullshit I've ever heard in my life. Because these smart intellectual people want you to believe that there was nothing, and nothing exploded and made everything. That's the Big Bang Theory, people. Nothing exploded and made everything. I ain't buying that shit. Even when I was drinking, I wasn't buying that shit. So the question is, who then made all this? I have to ask myself that. I have to talk to some people about this. And it says, yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice, and that's our old ideas. Prejudice in this respect is our old ideas. And express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results. Even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power, which is God. And I told you a few weeks ago that I don't understand God. I don't understand God. But I have an understanding of God that works well for me. And if you want to grow in this program, grow spiritually and keep, progressing in this type of a life, you have to get an understanding of God that works for you. Not that you have to understand God, but you have to get an understanding of God that works for you. And it says, much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to effect a contact with him. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. You start wherever you're at. And the exercise we're going to do for step 2, we'll come back to this and it'll make sense to you later. But we'll get to that at the end of the second step. And I'll give you an exercise that actually allows you to take a look at the second step, okay? He says in this paragraph too, we found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek him. To us, the realm of the spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidden to those who earnestly seek. It is open, we believe, to all men. Did we talk a couple weeks ago? We talked about the house and the 4 walls and the ceiling and the floor and all the stuff in there, right? Mm-hmm. And how we worship and think about and talk about the tangible when life really takes place in the intangible, in the empty space in the 4 walls, right? Okay, page 47. When therefore we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God. So, I find it amazing that this book, in this step, asks us this question more than once. Yet, I speak to people all the time in recovery, and I ask them, what did you do for step 2? Oh, my sponsor asked me if I believe in God. That doesn't cut it. That just doesn't cut it. And therefore we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God. So here's a question. What is your conception of God? Who is God to you? What is God to you? If you don't question that, you might as well have a friggin' light bulb as a higher power. But the amazing thing is that most people that come into the rooms don't get into this. They talk a little bit around it, but they don't really get into this. Do not let any prejudice, again, old ideas, you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. At the start, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth. So right here, mark your book, right here in this page, right in there, is the start of spiritual growth. Now, just on a couple of pages back, was the search for God begins, and now we're at a point where this is the start of spiritual growth right here. Okay, I'll read it again. It says, do not let any prejudice, again, prejudice is old ideas, you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. At the start, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth. You see it? To affect our first conscious relation with God as we understood Him. So the start of spiritual growth comes when you start honestly asking yourself what these things mean to you. And that's all you need to begin. Afterwards, we found ourselves accepting many things which then seemed entirely out of reach. That was growth. But if we wished to grow, we had to begin somewhere. So we used our own conception, however limited it was. So now he's setting us up here. Okay, he's setting us up to get a relationship with God without having to recreate the wheel. Okay, so he's asking you to answer the question. What is God? What's God to you? What is your concept of God? Now, I had a guy in Florida some years ago argue with me for endlessly about this next paragraph, that he said this was the whole crux of the second step, that this paragraph was all there was to the second step. And I said, that's funny. Why do they have all these pages after it? It's like 8 or 10 pages more. Why don't we just rip them out and throw them away if this is all there is to the second step? I said, you're missing a word right before this paragraph. He said, what? I said, the word begin. That was growth, but if we wish to grow, we had to begin somewhere. So here's what we're beginning. What we needed to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? So believing is the cornerstone of the foundation. As soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he's on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. So this cornerstone, later we're going to talk about the keystone, and we're building an arch, right? And here's the cornerstone. The cornerstone is, what is God to you? What is your concept of God? You need to have an answer to that. Here's one of the ways we can get to an answer to that, or start believing, is by accepting our powerlessness and our unmanageability in the first step. We're accepting that we can't recover alone. We need help. If you accept your powerlessness and your unmanageability in step one, then you are, in fact, admitting that you need help. That help, the second step says, will come from a power greater than ourselves. So the second step is about hope. It's a higher power and dealing with reality. Reality sucks when you're new. And sometimes even today it sucks, right? But that's what it is. This whole program is about getting out of the fantasy and into reality. If we're powerless, we surrender, we give up with that, right? With that sense of surrender comes feelings, fear, anger. You remember when we made the test tube alcoholic and we removed the alcohol and the drugs and we were left with all of this shit, right? Well, this is what you got. At this point in recovery, this is what you got. Just a whole tube full of this negative stuff. If we're powerless over a problem, how could we ever solve it? Right? That's going to be, how could we ever solve it? The second step gives us the solution. Our situation is not hopeless. Far from it. There is hope, but that hope lies outside of ourselves. And here's a mistake that a lot of people make. They focus too much on what they don't understand about God. They spend awful lot of time trying to figure out what they don't get about God, what they don't understand about God. Don't waste your time doing that, people. Focus on what you do understand about God. And that's where, because this is just the beginning. This is where we're going to start, right? I read you that thing last week because I wanted to open up your mind to the fact that there's a God that loves you. And I think I told you that from week one. I told you that. I told you because in forward to the first edition, it says that we recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And if you remember, I told you, you're not hopeless. Just seems that way when we get here. You're really not hopeless. It sure seemed that way, but you're not. And I gave you the example of the $100 bill, right? And every one of you had your damn hand up. You wanted to, especially Vicky. Right? Because no matter what happened to that bill, it never lost its value. It was still worth the $100. And no matter whatever happened to you, been kicked to the curb, been stepped on, been crumbled up, and rolled over, and all that stuff, you're still worth a lot. And last week we heard said that God said you're worth the king's ransom. King's ransom. So try to start focusing on what you do know about God, what you do believe about God. Because everything is about change here, right? This is all about change. You might want to write this in your book somewhere. But step one is the willingness to change. Step two is the belief that I can change. This is week 10, yes. Step one, the willingness to change. Step two is the belief that I can change. Step three is a decision to change. Steps 4 and 5 is action to change. Am I going too fast? Yes. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Step one is a willingness to change. Step two is a belief that I can change. Step three is a decision to change. Steps 4 and 5 is action to change. Steps 6 and 7 is action to change. 4 and 5 is action to change. 6 and 7 is action to change. 8 and 9 is more action to change. 10 and 11, guess what it is? More action to change. Step 12, I've changed. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, I am now able to be, do, and think like I've never been able to be, do, and think before. I've changed. Yes, 12 is I've changed.
help others.
and help others to change. That's all part of it. But each morning when I wake up, I make a new commitment every morning to myself, not to keep away from a drink, but to have God in my life today. Because of and by myself, I don't make healthy, good decisions. They're healthier and better than they were 35 years ago, but they're still not where they should be of and by myself. So I have to incorporate each morning God in my life. And because of that, I am able to make healthy and good decisions. Yes.
You said those steps a little differently.
What'd I say?
4 years ago.
What'd I say? What'd I say 4
Willing
years
to
ago?
change, believe I can change. Decision to change. Step 4 is an inventory to change. 5, 6, and 7 actions to change. 8, 9, 10, and 11 more inventory to change, and 12 I have changed.
Well, yeah, and the inventory to change would be covered in the action to change.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I didn't miss something.
No, you didn't miss nothing. I
Okay.
just,
He's fact checking you.
yeah.
Just try not to write it down again.
If I say action to change, I cover all that shit.
Thank you.
Because you know what? 25 years ago, Kelly might open her book and say I said something different.
Is this the same?
I'm not going to go over this, but I want to give you this if you're interested to look it up. You could go to YouTube and look this guy up. He's brilliant. This guy's brilliant. His name is Kent Hovind, Hovind. Kent, Hovind, and he's a spiritual guy, and he was on a panel. It's like a 6-minute video. He was on a panel, and there was 3 professors in this college, and they were atheists, and they were proving the non-existence of God. So they asked him to explain about God, and he gives the best explanation you ever heard. And if you go to, I think it says, "Where did God come from?" If you go to YouTube and put in his name and "Where did God come from?" Trust me, you'll enjoy it. It's about 5 or 6 minutes long. The guy gives the best answer you ever heard. All 3 of the professors were like. Okay. So let's go back to page 48. We're on 47? Okay. You sure that wasn't 4 years ago?
Yeah.
Well, well, let's go to page 48. We're done with 47. Top of the page is so it says here, many of us have been so touchy that even casual reference to spiritual things made us bristle with antagonism. This sort of thinking had to be abandoned. So these are more instructions, people. These are a lot of instructions on this page. Though some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside such feelings. Faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became as open-minded on spiritual matters as we had tried to be on other questions. In this respect, alcohol was a great persuader. It finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. Sometimes it was a tedious process. We hope no one else will be prejudiced for as long as some of us were. So the second step continues the humbling process that began in step 1, right? The humbling process in step 1 is that you're powerless, your life's unmanageable, you're not God. And so this step, in step 2, it introduces to the idea that you're not God, that there is a God, and it isn't me, it isn't her, it isn't him, it isn't them. And that's a humbling thought. The restoration to sanity is about getting out of the fantasies, we already mentioned this, and learning to live in reality. So the only way to do that is to be able to exchange old ideas, old beliefs that we hold true for ones that we don't hold true and kind of switch that around, right? Fantasy's nice. Most of us enjoy living in fantasy, right? But the only way out of loneliness is to get out of the fantasy and into reality. And it's a power greater than ourselves that arranges that restoration. Not a spouse, a house, or a mouse. Okay? None of these things has the power to restore us to sanity, but God does. So, all right, page 49. Here's some more instructions on the first paragraph. Instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, spearheads of God's advancing creation, we agnostics and atheists choose to believe that our human intelligence was the last word, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and end of all. Rather vain of us, wasn't it? You'll see those three professors, and that if you watch that video, that's who they thought they were. We who have traveled this dubious path beg you to lay aside prejudice. Again, prejudice is your old ideas. Okay? Even against organized religion. We have learned that whatever the human frailties of various faiths may be, those faiths have given purpose and directions to millions. People of faith have a logical idea of what life is all about. Actually, we used to have no reasonable conception whatever. We used to assume ourselves by cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs and practices when we might have observed that many spiritual-minded persons of all races, colors, and creeds were demonstrating a degree of stability, happiness, and usefulness which we should have sought ourselves. So I could remember many nights before I got sober being in an apartment or a bar or a club or something and being out for 2 days and looking, it's early in the morning now, the sun's starting to come up, and I peep out the window and I see people scuttering around, and I used to say, look at these chumps going to work. Got a job, right? I never had a job in my life. And I used to make fun of them. Since I've been sober, I've learned something, harsh reality. I'm the chump. They're the tough people. They're the ones that had their shit together, going out, taking care of their families and getting up in the morning and going to work, and not me. And that was a harsh reality for me because I really thought that's not about what life is about. All right. So the immediate application of step 2 really is to prepare us for the third step. Each step is to prepare us for the next step, right? Step 1 was, at the end of step 1, you're pretty hopeless, right? If you've done a thorough first step. And by the way, that exercise you did in step 1 is something you should continue to do as often as possible. The more you do that in different topics or different areas, the more you'll get to understand the truth about yourself. But at the end of the first step, you're in a pretty hopeless position. That's where you're supposed to be. Because it's not pretty looking at yourself, right? So step 2 is, I told you 2 weeks ago, step 2 is the promise of hope. You're in a hopeless position, and here's step 2. It's the promise of hope, right? So now, by applying all this stuff, step 3 is setting us up to do step 3. Opening our minds to the possibility of a power greater than ourselves. And it also helps us counter the feelings of powerlessness and unmanageability that we experience from the first step. Go to page 50. Okay, there's a lot of stuff on this page. Top of the page. Instead, we looked at the human defects of these people and sometimes used their shortcomings as a basis of wholesale condemnation. We talked of intolerance while we were intolerant ourselves. We missed the reality and the beauty of the forest because we were diverted by the ugliness of some of its trees. We never gave the spiritual side of life a fair hearing. Let me ask you a question. What spiritual side of life is there if you believe in nothing? If you don't have a God in your life, what spiritual side of life is there? That spiritual side of life is just you and your mind and your great powers because you have no God in your life. So, in our personal stories, you will find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives of the power which is greater than himself. So, right there, that sentence is telling you that the whole back of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is step 2. Every one of the personal stories is step 2. That's why earlier in the book it told us to make sure we read the book through. It doesn't say anything about reading the first 164 pages. You'll never find that anywhere. And just the opposite. It tells us to read the book through. Because if we read all those stories, we're going to find a story that's similar to our own and might help us get in touch with a higher power. Whether we agree with the particular approach or conception seems to make little difference. Experience has taught us that these are matters about which, for our purpose, we need not be worried. There are questions for each individual to settle for himself. So there's another instruction. It's asking you to settle this yourself. Settle what? The approach. Do you agree on a certain approach about a higher power? Your concept of an approach to a higher power. Do you believe in that or not? On one proposition, however, these men and women are strikingly agreed. Every one of them has gained access to and believes in a power greater than himself. That's a pretty powerful statement. Now, who's he talking about? He's talking about all the people in the stories of the book. They've all gained access to and believe in, and they tell you how that was done. This power has in each case accomplished the miraculous, the humanly impossible. Miracles. This room right here, right now, is full of miracles. I know I'm a miracle. You're a miracle too. Last week, that reading, hopefully, made you think about what type of miracle you are. You're the greatest miracle in the world. Right? That's what the whole book, that whole chapter was about. The greatest miracle in the world is the name of the book. You are the greatest miracle in the world. So he says, in the face of collapse and despair, in the face of the total failure of their human resources, they found that a new power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. This happened soon as they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. Question. Don't yell out the answer. Raise your hand if you want to answer this. What are the few simple requirements?
We're greater than ourselves and it makes sense to us.
Huh?
To have a power greater than ourselves and for it to make sense to us.
Okay.
There's the first requirement that Eli from self-will, yada, 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 that kind of stuff. That's one of the requirements.
Okay, but you're getting a little, you're correct, but you're a little ahead of where we're at. At this point in the book, we're not there yet. So we don't have that as an answer. That sounds good, but they're not simple. They're not simple for people like us. I mean, maybe they are for some people, maybe they were for you. But for me, they're not. Honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness is not simple. It was a struggle. Does that make sense?
I know, but I was here 4 years ago.
Hold on. Let me get her. That's a simple requirement. Go ahead, Doc.
12 steps.
The 12 steps. The 12 steps.
I
To
read-
continue on doing this deal, to wholeheartedly meet a few simple requirements to keep doing this. Because when you keep doing this, you're going to get what you said. And what you said over there is gonna be true. And actually, what all you guys said is going to be true as we keep doing this. But I don't think honest and open-minded is something newcomers are capable of. So he says, once confused and baffled by the seeming futility in existence, they show the underlying reasons why they were making heavy going of life, not drinking. You see what he's talking about here? They made heavy going of life. Leaving aside the drink question, they tell why living was so unsatisfactory. So pay attention to this here. We're not talking about drinking. In fact, he's telling you to leave aside the drink question. Life was hard. Life was tough because most of us are not honest and open-minded. Yeah. They show how the change came over them. Now, I want to tell you something. I don't remember. I honest to God, don't remember where I was. But I was doing a workshop, and there were hundreds of people in the audience. I don't remember where I was. I might have been Kansas City or Milwaukee or someplace, but I really don't remember. It was a very long time ago. And I was doing a thing, and there was a lot of people in the audience. And I asked everybody that believed in God to raise their hand. And hundreds of people raised their hand. And I said, if you believe that this God that you believe in is the most important aspect of your life, keep your hand up. Some people put their hands down, but hundreds of hands were up. I said, thank you. Put your hand down. I said, how many people are in their first 6 months of sobriety? Dozens of people raising their hands. I said, did you see all these people that had their hand up, that believe in a God and believe that? And they said, yeah. I said, let me read something to you. And I opened the book to this page, to this paragraph. And I read, when many hundreds of people are able to say that the consciousness of the presence of God is today the most important fact of their lives, they present the powerful reason why one should have faith. Now, he's using the word faith here, and I tell you it's not about faith. But this is not, when he says faith here, he's not talking about the second step. He's talking about this example. That this example of all these hundreds of people that just raised their hand, it was a powerful thing. That I don't remember where the hell I was. I'm trying to think. I can't remember where I was. I remember it happened, and there was a lot of people there. Oh, I was in Atlanta. I was in Atlanta, Georgia, and there was a whole hundreds of people in the room. Yeah,
You're sure of that?
yeah. I'm sure. I am sure. Not 100% sure, but I'd be willing to wager that it was Atlanta. But isn't that a great example? Think about being you and being in a room full of hundreds of people and all drunks and addicts and asking them that question. And all these people raise their hand that they believe in God and that they believe that that's the most important fact of their life today is this God. They present a powerful reason why one should have faith. Okay, so there's more instructions here. The bottom of the page, the last paragraph, we asked ourselves this: are not some of us just as biased and unreasonable about the realm of the spirit as were the ancients about the realm of the material? That's a little trickier and a little wordy, but it's a good instruction to ask yourself. Let's go over to page 52. Okay. We'll go to the second paragraph. We had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view. We were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. We were prey to misery, depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of any real help to other people. Was not our basic solution of these bedevilments more important than whether we should see newsreels of lunar flights? Of course it was. I want to tell you that there's a faction of people in Alcoholics Anonymous that believe in a threefold disease. We talked about this week 1 or week 2. That they believe that this is a disease of mind, body, and spirit, right? And one of the big proponents of that, the guy that preaches this, very well known in AA, I won't use any names. Him and I were doing a convention together years ago, and again, I don't remember where the hell we were, but I remember we were outside smoking cigarettes, and he said to me, "This is weird, Danny." He said, "You're going to get up there and you're going to tell them about this, and I'm going to get up there and I'm going to tell them about that." And he said, "It's going to be very contradictory." I said, "Hey, listen, you have the right to be wrong. It's okay." And he said, "Oh," I said, "Well, explain to me where in the book does it say we have a three?" And he took me to this page and he took me to the bedevilments. And he tried to tell me that what I just read was proof of a spiritual disease. And I, after he closed the book, I reopened it. And I said, "Let me reread what you just read. And I want you to pay attention to the first sentence. We had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems." That's what these are. The bedevilments are human problems. They are not a spiritual disease. They're human problems. The same readiness to change our point of view. And he had no answer for that. But he still, to this day, he goes all over the world and preaches a threefold disease. And that's his reasoning for that. The bedevilments are nothing more than human problems. Thank you. Now, human problems for us are multiplied. You know, normal people have human problems too, but they don't suffer from them as drastically as we do because we're very emotionally wound, right? You know, I told you before. You know, we're not talking cured here. You know, there's some issues that we have. All right. So let's go down. Keep reading this here. When we saw others solve their problems by a simple reliance upon the spirit of the universe, we had to stop doubting the power of God. Our ideas didn't work, but the God idea did. Now, if you notice in this chapter so far, he's used the word as creative intelligence, all different ways he's saying, uh, just a bunch of different ways he spirit of universe. He's using all of these things. Now, this is all about our basic solution to these bedevilments. Is one of the main things is we suffer from, besides alcoholism, we suffer from controlism. we, you know, the illusion of control is pretty powerful, right? You had to be in control to be comfortable. Most of us, you know. And spirituality, I want you to understand this. Spirituality doesn't just deal with God. Spirituality is not limited just to God. It deals with you and it deals with other people. You have to have other people. It's incomplete unless it includes other people. That's why a lot of us couldn't have a real relationship because we had to dominate or control it. right? And how do you control or dominate a relationship? You can do it two ways, through dependence or through power, right? You have the other person depend on you so much you're controlling them, or you're just outright. So that's why we can't have until we come in here and learn how to live life differently. Can't have a good relationship. Okay, page 53. Go down to the second paragraph. When we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis we could not postpone or evade, we had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? Now, this is an instruction that's blatant. This isn't a blatant instruction, right? It's a huge instruction. So here's the problem with this. If you ask everybody in the room, is God everything or is he nothing? Almost every last person is going to say God is everything because they know that's what they're supposed to say. Who wants to sit in here if I just mess my life up and sit in here and say God is nothing? Now, you may say God is everything, but my question to you then is, why don't you act like that? Why don't you act that way? If God is everything, why don't you act? Why don't you live that way? Why are you living the way you're living if you want to go around and talk about God is everything? I don't think God's everything if you're doing that. You're living that way. So when you say God is everything, then the question is based on what? If God is everything, what are you basing that assumption or that thing on? It's not good enough to just say God is everything. That doesn't cut it. God is based on what? Certainly not how you've been living. Because you haven't been living like God is everything. You've been living like you're everything, and that's why you're in the trouble you're in. Arrived at this point, we were squarely confronted with the question of faith. We couldn't duck the issue. Some of us had already walked far over the bridge of reason toward the desired shore of faith. The outlines and promise of the new land had brought luster to tired eyes and fresh courage to flagging spirits. Friendly hands had stretched out in welcome. We were grateful that reason, capital R, talking about God, our thinking there, right? Reason, that's our mind, is God. Reason had brought us so far, but somehow we couldn't quite step ashore. Perhaps we had been leaning too heavily on reason that last mile, and we did not like to lose our support. It's funny because tomorrow I'm going to Scotland. And the last time I was in Scotland was me. I don't know if you know who Clancy was, but Clancy and I went to. I was the Friday night speaker. Clancy was the Saturday night speaker, and um, uh, I did a workshop Saturday morning. He did a workshop Saturday afternoon, and he did a workshop there, and he talked about the invisible boat. I don't know if you've ever heard Clancy, but there's many tapes of his around. If you can ever get a hold of Clancy talking about the invisible boat, get it. A very spiritual talk he gave. And basically, I don't want to ruin his great speech, but basically, it's a guy gets in the boat. He hears there's his island, and he's all the fun and the music and the laughter, and he don't know how to get there. And he sees a guy at the show. He says, "How you get there?" The guy said, "Oh, get in the boat," but there's no boat there. The guy says, "Come on!" And the guy goes like this, "Come on, get in." He goes like that. And the guy says, "Help me row, help me row." And as they approach the island, the closer they get to the island, the boat starts to appear. They're on. And that's just a quick version of Clancy's story, but it's worth listening to Clancy say that. So anyway, all right. So there's a lot of questions to answer here. Next week, we're going to finish this chapter and we're going to do the second step. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be here next week. Sorry. 2 weeks, we'll finish this chapter. And so this is a good week to catch up on any of the weeks that you've missed. We've got 5 minutes left. Let's do some questions. Who's got a question? Excuse me? Oh, yeah, you're only gonna find plants the I. I had a mature moment. I couldn't think of it. I've been there about 5 times, so it's hard to say, but I want to say I was still living in Florida, so it was probably about 8 or 9 years ago. It was right before Sandy Beach died, and then because Sandy was in Florida where I was, and but who's got a question? Who's got a question about what we've been doing so far? Where we're at with this step? Go ahead. I'm sorry. What? You mean the appendants in the back? We're gonna go there. Yeah. No, not yet. Next week. The week after. Okay.
the period. But it says, we have been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. So when you were, and I really am just asking
Guys, go ahead.
about, when you're talking about the guy saying that this is a threefold disease
Right.
and you were disagreeing with that.
Yeah.
So where does that fit?
Okay. Read the whole paragraph.
I know it's talking about resentment.
Talking about resentment. Not talking about alcoholism.
Okay.
That's exactly where it fits. He's not talking about alcoholism. He's talking about resentment. Resentment is the number one offender, right? From it stem all forms of spiritual disease. From what? From resentment. From alcoholism? No. From resentment. So resentments can form spiritual disease. Does not talk about alcohol. Listen. Who else? No, because when I read them, the stories are different now. I don't know, but in Cocaine Anonymous, there's a storybook that replaces the stories that in the big book, and in the Cocaine Anonymous book, one of the stories is mine in that book. I don't even know the name of it. They changed the name of it, but so that would be my favorite story, mine. We're not talking cured here, okay? Levi.
Arc Freedom Mission Foundation. So where
Well, the believing is one cornerstone, and willingness is throughout all the steps. But willingness would be the other cornerstone, and then so you got, and then the keystone is the middle one, and that's the arch, right? But willingness is a principle that's in all of the steps. So you have your foundation is willingness and a belief. Just like we talked about, step one is a willingness to change, and step two is a belief that I can change. So in that arch is willingness and belief. Anybody else? We got time for another question or two. Yes. Question. Oh, Mike. Keep doing the work. Keep working. All right. Who else? Anybody else? Last chance. All right. Have a great week. I'll see you guys in 2 weeks.